The night the doctor said the word terminal, Daniel Cole felt the world tilt like a sinking ship. The fluorescent lights above the pediatric ward hummed, cruelly calm, as if they hadn't just rewritten his life. His son Leo lay asleep on the narrow hospital bed, a thin arm wrapped around a stuffed dinosaur, breath shallow but stubborn. Daniel pressed his forehead to the cold glass of the window and whispered promises he didn't know how to keep. He would save his son. He would do anything, anything at all. Daniel had been many things in his 34 years, a devoted husband once, a widower too soon, a careful accountant with a small apartment and a smaller circle of friends. Since Leo's mother died 3 years earlier, Daniel's life had narrowed to two things: work and hospital corridors. When the rare genetic treatment became available, it sounded like a miracle wrapped in fine print. It was experimental. It was risky. And it was impossibly expensive. Insurance refused. Loans laughed him out the door. Charity lists were long and slow, and Leo didn't have time. That was when Mrs. Hahn, his elderly neighbor, mentioned the marriage contract. Daniel almost laughed when she brought it up, standing in the dim hallway with her grocery bags. But Mrs. Hahn was serious, her lined face solemn. There was a family trust, she said, an old tradition tied to marriage. Her niece, Mei Lin, was the beneficiary, if she married and settled. The trust would release funds not only for her but for the establishment of a family. Enough money to cover Leo's treatment 10 times over. Daniel shook his head, mortified. He wasn't a desperate man, he told himself. He wasn't the kind of person who married for money. But desperation has a way of changing definitions. When the next scan showed the disease progressing faster than expected, Daniel called Mrs. Hahn back. He met Mei Lin 2 days later in a quiet tea shop. She arrived early, sitting rigidly at a corner table, face half hidden behind a pale silk mask that covered her nose and mouth. Her hair was neatly tied back, her hands folded, knuckles white. When she stood to greet him, she bowed slightly, eyes downcast. "I know this is unusual," she said, voice soft but steady. Daniel nodded, uncomfortable. He tried not to stare at the mask, at the way it clung to her face. Mrs. Hahn had mentioned scars. An accident. People could be unkind. Daniel had brushed it off then, but now he felt a tight knot in his chest. He wasn't a shallow man, he reminded himself. This was an arrangement, a sacrifice for his son. Looks didn't matter. They talked for an hour. Mei Lin spoke carefully, choosing her words like fragile glass. She worked as a seamstress from home, loved old movies, disliked crowds. She knew about Leo's illness. She didn't ask for romance or affection, only respect and honesty. The trust required a legal marriage and cohabitation for 1 year. After that, either party could leave with no penalty. "Why would you agree to this?" Daniel asked finally. "You don't know me." Mei Lin's eyes flickered up to his for a moment, dark, observant, tired. "Because I'm tired of hiding," she said. "And because a child shouldn't die if I can help." They married quietly at a courthouse. No flowers, no guests, just signatures and a handshake from a board clerk. When the trust released the funds, Daniel felt like crying with relief. Leo's treatment began within the week. Living together was awkward. Daniel worried constantly about doing the wrong thing, about saying something insensitive. Mei Lin kept her distance, moving softly around the apartment, always masked when Daniel was home. At night, Daniel lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, guilt gnawing at him. He was using her, even if she claimed to be willing. He tried to compensate with politeness, with space, with gratitude. He didn't know how to express. Leo, however, adored her. She stitched him tiny dinosaur patches onto his pajamas, told him stories with funny voices, sat beside his bed during the long, painful nights after treatments. Leo never asked about the mask. Children often see what adults miss. To him, Mei Lin was simply kind. As months passed, Leo began to improve. His color returned. His laughter came back, tentative at first, then full and unrestrained. Daniel watched his son run down the hospital hallway one afternoon, for pole rattling behind him, and felt something like hope bloom again, and slowly, something else changed too. Daniel noticed the way Mei Lin hummed while she sewed, the way she flinched when strangers stared too long, the quiet strength in her hands. He noticed how lonely she was, how carefully she kept herself small. One evening, after Leo fell asleep, Daniel found her on the balcony, mask still on, staring out at the city lights. "You don't have to hide at home," he said gently. "I don't mind." Her shoulders stiffened. "You say that now," she replied. "But people always do." There was pain in her voice that stopped him cold. He realized then how little he truly knew about her life, about what she had endured. The marriage had been a transaction for him. For her, it was something else, another risk, another chance to be hurt. The night everything changed began with a scream. Leo collapsed during dinner, his body seizing, eyes rolling back. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs as he called an ambulance, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. At the hospital, doctors rushed Leo away, voices sharp and urgent. Daniel paced the corridor, breath coming in ragged gasps. Mei Lin stood beside him, silent, hands clasped. Hours crawled by. Finally, a doctor approached, face grave. "The treatment caused complications," she said. "We need consent for an emergency procedure. His legal guardians must sign." Daniel signed immediately. Mei Lin hesitated. "You don't have to," Daniel said quickly. "I'll handle it." But Mei Lin shook her head. "I'm his mother too," she said, voice trembling but firm. "On paper, and in my heart." She stepped forward and signed. They sat together through the night, exhaustion heavy between them. At dawn, a nurse approached with news. Leo was stable. The procedure had worked. Daniel sagged against the wall, tears streaming down his face. He turned to Mei Lin, words failing him. In that moment, raw and unguarded, he saw her not as part of a deal, not as a means to an end, but as someone who had stood beside him when it mattered most. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." Mei Lin didn't respond right away. Slowly, she reached up and unfastened the strings of her mask. Daniel's breath caught. The scars were worse than he had imagined, angry, uneven lines stretching across her cheek and jaw, twisting her features in ways that made his stomach lurch. The horror flashed through him before he could stop it, a visceral, shameful reaction that made him look away. Mei Lin saw it anyway. "This is why," she said quietly. "This is why I hide." The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel felt sick, with himself, with the world that had taught him to recoil from pain made visible. He forced himself to look back at her, really look. The scars were there, yes. But so were her eyes, steady and brave, and the woman who had just helped save his son. "I was in a fire," she continued. People stared. They whispered. Some were kind. Most weren't. I learned early that it was easier to disappear. Daniel swallowed hard. "I can't undo what I felt just now," he said honestly. "But I don't want to be that person. And I don't want you to disappear." Mei Lin studied him for a long moment, searching his face for lies. Finally, she nodded, not in forgiveness, but in understanding. Healing, Daniel learned, was not a single moment but a series of choices. He chose to stay when it was uncomfortable. He chose to listen when Mei Lin spoke of her past. He chose to confront his own shallow fears and unlearn them, day by day. Mei Lin, in turn, chose to trust, slowly, carefully, allowing herself to be seen without the mask, at least at home. When Leo came back from the hospital, he barely noticed the change. He hugged Mei Lin, face pressed against her shoulder, and declared her the bravest person he knew. She laughed through tears. By the time the year was up, the trust's condition fulfilled, neither Daniel nor Mei Lin mentioned leaving. One evening, months later, Daniel watched Mei Lin sew at the kitchen table, mask discarded, scars glowing softly in the lamplight. He realized something that startled him with its simplicity: he loved her. Not out of gratitude. Not out of obligation. But because she was strong and kind and had shown him what real courage looked like. "I don't need the contract anymore," he said softly. "But I want you. If you'll stay." Mei Lin set down her needle. "I was never ugly," she said gently. "Just hurt." Daniel nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know that now." The story of how their family began was messy and flawed, born of fear and desperation. But it grew into something honest. Leo recovered fully, running and laughing like any other child. Mei Lin started teaching sewing classes, no longer hiding. Daniel learned that love isn't about perfection, it's about seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway. And in the end, the mask that mattered most wasn't the one Mei Lin wore on her face, but the one Daniel had worn on his heart, until love finally taught him how to take it off.